Graham Sullivan's hands were numb as he tugged his daughter's coat tighter around her tiny shoulders, steam curling from his breath as they hurried through the icy wind whipping down 4th and Main. "Daddy," 6-year-old Gracie said, her nose pink, "why is it always so cold when we have to catch the bus?" Graham crouched beside her at the street corner, brushing a frozen strand of hair off her cheek. "Because winter loves to make us late for school," he grinned, trying to sound upbeat. "But don't worry, spring always catches up." She giggled, wrapping her arms around him, and he caught a whiff of her strawberry shampoo. He didn't mind the cold. What hurt more was the fact that he couldn't afford a reliable car anymore, not after the hospital bills, or the fact that he had to split his shifts at the diner so he could walk Gracie to and from school himself. He glanced around for the bus, rubbing his hands together. That's when he saw her. Across the street, a woman stood shivering in a thin, designer-looking coat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had no gloves, no scarf, and her high heels were doing no favors on the slushy sidewalk. But it wasn't just the way she looked, it was the lost expression on her face. Like she didn't belong, she was stunning. Tall, with long dark hair and a kind of elegance that didn't match the neighborhood. Her lips were trembling. Gracie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, she looks really cold." Graham hesitated only a second before pulling off his only good sweater, the thick navy one his sister had given him last Christmas, and weaving through the traffic to cross the street. "Ma'am," he said gently. "You okay?" The woman looked up at him, startled. Her eyes were glassy but clear green. I'm fine," she said, her voice hoarse. "I just didn't think it would be this cold. I was supposed to get picked up, but my driver's not answering." Driver still. Graham didn't ask questions. He just offered her the sweater. She blinked. "No, I can't take that, please," he said. "You're shaking." After a second, she took it slowly, slipping it over her shoulders. It hung loosely, but warmth returned to her face almost instantly. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "That's really kind of you," he smiled. "It's nothing, just glad you're okay." "I'm Gwendolyn," she said, holding out her hand. "Graham," he replied, shaking it. "And that's my daughter, Gracie." He motioned across the street where Gracie waved happily. Gwendolyn smiled, genuinely. "She's beautiful." "Thanks." "She's my whole world." A black SUV finally pulled into the street behind her. The window rolled down and a man in a suit called out, "Miss Whitlow, we're so sorry, got caught in traffic." She turned back to Graham, looking suddenly conflicted. "Can I return this somehow?" "Your sweater, don't worry about it," he said. "It's just a sweater." But her eyes lingered on his and something passed between them, a strange, quiet beat. Then she was gone, swept into the SUV, the sweater still clutched around her. Gracie ran up beside him. "Is she okay?" "Yeah," Graham said, staring after the car. "I think so." He didn't think he'd see her again. But 2 days later, she walked into the diner where he worked wearing his sweater. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, and Graham was wiping down tables when the bell over the door jingled. He looked up, then froze. Gwendolyn Whitlow stood there, the same elegance, but this time with a determined look on her face. "I tracked you down through the school," she said, walking up to him. "I remembered your daughter's name. I hope that's not creepy. I wanted to return this." She held up the sweater, neatly folded and a crisp envelope on top. "I told you not to worry about it." "I know, but I wanted to." He took the sweater but didn't touch the envelope. "You didn't have to, I wanted to," she said again, firmer this time. "You helped me when you didn't even know me, and that doesn't happen often," he sighed. "Look, I'm not looking for a handout." "It's not a handout," she said. "It's lunch with me, my treat." He blinked. "What? You get a break, right? Let me buy you lunch." "You gave me your only sweater in a snowstorm. The least I can do is a burger and fries." He studied her. "You're serious, completely." He gestured toward the corner booth. "All right, one lunch, but I'm picking the fries." She grinned. "Deal?" As they sat, Graham noticed how she looked around the diner like it was foreign territory, but she didn't complain. Instead, she asked about Gracie, about his job, about the neighborhood. She was curious, warm, and surprisingly funny. "So," he said finally, "driver, designer coat, mystery envelope. What do you do exactly?" She hesitated. "I run a company, a fashion brand, for women's formal wear." He raised an eyebrow. "Like a boutique," she tilted her head. "More like a chain. I inherited it from my mother." "It's called Whitlow." He nearly choked on his soda. Wait, Whitlow as in the Whitlow collection? Yeah, you're a millionaire. Technically, yes, he stared at her. So why were you walking around freezing on my street? She laughed. Because I fired my assistant that morning and forgot to check the weather app. He couldn't help but laugh too. Well, now I feel underdressed. You're wearing the best sweater I've ever borrowed. Her eyes softened. And you didn't even hesitate. He looked at her, this woman who'd just walked into his life twice now, both times completely unexpected. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift inside him. After lunch, she stood, pulling a card from her coat pocket. If you ever want to talk, she said, or if you need anything, call me. He took the card. His fingers brushed hers. Thanks, Gwendolyn. Call me Gwen, she said, smiling. I think we're past formal names now. He watched her leave again, stunned. It was supposed to be just a sweater. But something told him this wasn't the end. Graham stood behind the counter of the diner, the late afternoon rush settling into a quiet lull. He wiped down a plate with practiced rhythm, but his mind was elsewhere, still caught in the strange gravity of Gwen Whitlow. Since their lunch 3 days earlier, he hadn't called the number on her card. The small rectangle sat untouched in the back of his wallet, tucked behind a photo of Gracie at her last school recital. He told himself he didn't want to impose, but the truth pulled tighter than that. He didn't know what to do with someone like her. Order up, called Lou from the kitchen, sliding a plate of meatloaf across the counter. Graham set the plate on a tray and brought it to table 5, nodding politely at the older couple seated there. As he turned, the bell over the door chimed again. His heart kicked. Gwen stood in the entrance, this time in a sleek charcoal coat more fitted for the weather, her hair pulled back loosely at the nape. She looked around, spotted him, and walked over without hesitation. You didn't call, she said. I figured you were busy, Graham replied, drying his hands on his apron. Millionaire things to do? I am busy, she said, but I still wanted to see you. He cocked his head. You tracked me down again. I never stopped tracking, she replied, her gaze steady. I want to offer you something, he raised an eyebrow. Is this about my sweater again? No, she said. It's about your life. He folded his arms, cautious now. Gwen, I'm not looking for a rescue. Good, she said. Because I'm not offering one, I'm offering a job. His expression froze. A job, he repeated. Yes, I need someone I can trust to help with logistics at the new warehouse we're opening. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. You've managed a kitchen, right? You have organizational experience, you're adaptable, and you have a sharp eye for people. He blinked. You got all that from a lunch and a lost sweater. I got all that from watching how you move through the world, she said. You're calm under pressure, you listen closely, and you didn't hesitate to help a stranger without asking for anything. That's rare. He glanced toward the back where the line cook was arguing with the dishwasher over whose turn it was to load the crates. The place smelled like burnt toast. You're serious, he asked. Completely, she said. It pays better than this, full benefits, and it's 9 to 5. You'd be out in time to pick up Gracie every day. He stiffened. You asked about my daughter. I remembered her name, she said, and I asked the school secretary if she had any aftercare options. She said you always pick her up yourself. He didn't know whether to be impressed or alarmed. I'm not trying to intrude, she added. I know what it's like to grow up waiting for someone who never shows. He studied her. Why me? Because I trust you. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. I can't just walk out. I'm not asking you to, just think about it. Come see the space, meet the people, then decide. She handed him a manila folder. Inside was a printed job description, a salary breakdown, and a handwritten note with a time and address. I'll be there tomorrow, she said. If you're not, I won't ask again. She turned and left before he could respond. That night, after Gracie had fallen asleep, Graham sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of him. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the soft rattle of the radiator. He ran his fingers across the handwritten note. The salary listed was more than triple what he made at the diner. Health insurance. A retirement plan, paid time off. It sounded like a fantasy. He didn't sleep much. The next morning, he walked Gracie to school, her tiny mittened hand tucked in his. If I had a job where I could always pick you up on time, he asked her, would you like that? She nodded enthusiastically. Yes, then we could go to the park more. His chest ached. After dropping her off, he stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, then turned east and started walking. The warehouse was just outside the industrial district, tucked behind a row of brick buildings with faded murals. When he stepped inside, he found a space only half renovated, with scaffolding along the walls and racks being assembled in the corners. But it was clean, bright, and organized. Gwen stood near a table with a clipboard in hand, speaking to two workers in orange vests. She turned when she saw him and said something quietly to them before walking over. "You came," she said, her eyes lighting up. "I'm not saying yes," he replied. "I just wanted to see it." "Fair," she said. "Come on. I'll show you the operations area." She walked him through the space, pointing out where inventory would be logged, how shipments would be organized, where the break room was going in. She explained the role clearly without condescension. He asked questions and she answered them directly. At one point, a man in a blazer approached with a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "The vendor needs a signature." Gwen took the tablet, signed quickly, and handed it back. "I thought you said you ran a fashion company," Graham said once the man was gone. "I do," she replied. "But I also built the logistics arm myself. My mother was the face, I was the backbone." "You built this from the ground up," she said. "I don't just design gowns, I know how to move them." He stared at her differently now. Not as someone born into privilege, but someone who had fought for control of her life. After the tour, she led him to a small office with a folding table and 2 chairs. She poured them both coffee from a thermos. "You'd start next Monday," she said. "If you say yes." He leaned back. "You're trusting a stranger with a whole wing of your operation." "You're not a stranger, Graham," she said. "Not anymore." He sipped the coffee. It was strong, unapologetic, so was she. "I'll need to give notice at the diner," he said, her lips pressed together, but she didn't smile. "I'll wait." As he stepped out into the cold again, the folder tucked under his arm, he realized something had shifted, not just in his circumstances, but in how he saw possibility. And in the way Gwen Whitlow looked at him, like he wasn't just someone who loaned a sweater in a storm, but someone who might be worth betting on. Graham stepped into the warehouse that Monday morning, wearing a borrowed button-down shirt from his brother-in-law and the only jacket he had that didn't smell like fryer oil. The space buzzed with quiet activity as forklifts hummed in the distance and workers moved along the aisles with purpose. Everything had a rhythm, and for the first time in years, he could feel himself slotting into something structured, something that didn't leave his hands constantly aching or his back bent over dishes. He signed in at the front table, where a young woman with a headset gave him a clipboard with onboarding materials. Before he could ask where to go next, Gwen's voice carried from the mezzanine above. "First day nerves." He looked up to see her leaning against the railing, dressed in a fitted blazer and slacks, hair pulled up in a twist that made her look every bit the executive. But there was a softness to her expression, a quiet recognition that grounded him. "As long as no one asks me to assemble a dress, I think I'll survive," he said. She descended the stairs with a lightness that belied the authority she radiated. "No sewing required, but I will need you to evaluate the new inventory system by end of week. We're transitioning to a hybrid model, and I want your opinion before we roll it out." "You barely know how I work," he said. She paused at the last step, her eyes steady. "I know how you think." "That's more important." Graham followed her deeper into the warehouse, where the operations wing was still being finalized. She introduced him to the existing team, mostly young professionals, who greeted him with polite curiosity, and showed him to a modest office with 2 desks, a window overlooking the loading docks, and a stack of files marked vendor contracts. He spent the next few hours immersed in spreadsheets, learning the product tags and deciphering the shorthand used by the last logistics manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, quiet, and the kind of problem-solving he hadn't realized he missed. He didn't expect Gwen to show back up mid-afternoon, holding 2 paper cups from a nearby cafe. "Thought you might be drowning in acronyms," she said, handing him one. "WMS SCU FOB. It's like a foreign language. You'll pick it up faster than most." He leaned back in the chair, sipping the coffee. "You always this hands-on with new hires, only the ones who gave me their sweater in a snowstorm." he chuckled, shaking his head. You're not going to let that go, are you? No chance. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't press or demand, just existed comfortably. Then Gwen glanced toward the open door. I have a meeting at the Midtown office later, she said. But I wanted to check in first. You don't have to do that, I know, but I wanted to. He studied her for a moment. You always say exactly what you mean. Habit, she said. In my world, if you don't say what you mean, someone else will say it for you, usually wrong. He nodded slowly. That sounds exhausting. It is. Her phone vibrated and she glanced down before standing. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere. That evening, Graham picked up Gracie from school and brought her to the park near their apartment. She raced toward the swings and he pushed her gently, the sky overhead streaked with gold and soft lavender. Did you like your new job? She asked between squeals. I did, he said. It was different in a good way. Will I get to meet the nice lady again? He smiled. Probably. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Graham adjusted quickly to the role, surprising even himself with how naturally he fit into the new systems. He reorganized the shipment logs, caught a few discrepancies in vendor invoicing, and earned the quiet respect of the team with his calm, direct manner. He saw Gwen often, sometimes in meetings, occasionally during walkthroughs, and once when she called him up to the Midtown office to weigh in on a packaging redesign. Each encounter revealed a new layer: her dry humor in budget meetings, her fierce intelligence when negotiating supplier terms, and her vulnerability when she once mentioned she hated silence in large houses. It was after one of those Midtown meetings that she invited him to dinner. There's a staff appreciation event at Le Jardin tomorrow, she said, walking beside him to the elevator. It's mostly upper management and a few investors. I'd like you to come. He hesitated. Isn't that a little out of my league? Her expression didn't waver. You're in this company now. You should see how it breathes from the top down. I don't own a suit, he admitted. Then I'll take care of it. I'm not comfortable with that, he said quickly. I'm not offering to style you, she said. I'm offering to make sure you don't walk into a room built on optics feeling like you don't belong. It's a one-time thing. Think of it as part of the job. He still looked unsure, so she added, You'd be doing me a favor. I hate those events and I'd rather not go alone. That changed everything. The next evening, Graham stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the dark gray suit Gwen had arranged to have delivered to the warehouse. It fit perfectly tailored without being flashy. Gracie sat on the bed, legs crossed, watching him with wide eyes. You look like a movie star, she whispered. He grinned. You think so? Uh-huh. Are you gonna dance with the pretty lady? I don't think it's that kind of party, but part of him hoped it might be. A friend from his building agreed to watch Gracie for the night, and when Graham arrived at Le Jardin, he was struck silent. The restaurant was unlike anything he'd ever seen: gold leaf ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and soft jazz curling in the air like perfume. Waiters in pressed uniforms moved between tables, carrying trays of lobster bisque and champagne. Gwen spotted him near the entrance, wearing a floor-length navy gown that shimmered subtly under the lights. Her hair was swept up, and for a moment he forgot every word he'd planned to say. You clean up well, she said, her eyes scanning him. You didn't mention this place looked like Versailles. I didn't want to scare you off. She led him through the crowd, introducing him to board members and department heads. Every time she said his name, she added, He's heading up our warehouse transition, with a quiet pride that made his chest tighten. Later in the evening, as the room mellowed and the music slowed, she pulled him aside to the balcony overlooking the city. I know it's a lot, she said. But I wanted you to see this side of it, not just the concrete floors and shipping labels. He leaned on the railing. It's beautiful and completely foreign. It was to me once too, he turned to her. Why me, Gwen? Out of everyone, why keep pulling me into your life? She didn't look away. Because you make me feel real, and that's rare in my world. The air between them shifted. Neither of them said anything for a long moment, but when she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away, and for the first time in years, Graham Sullivan felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was beginning to live. Graham adjusted the strap of Gracie's backpack over his shoulder as she skipped ahead toward the school doors, her pigtails bouncing with each step. Morning drop-off had become one of his favorite parts of the day, no longer a rushed, anxious affair but a quiet, steady routine. The job at Whitlow's warehouse had given them stability, and with it, something he hadn't felt in years: peace. As Gracie hugged him goodbye and darted toward her teacher, he turned toward the sidewalk and nearly collided with Gwen. "I wasn't following you," she said quickly, holding up a coffee cup, "but I was in the area, and I thought you might want this." He took it, amused. "You remember how I take it. You're difficult to forget." They walked in step down the block, the early spring air warming the pavement. Trees were beginning to flower, and vendors were setting up sidewalk stands. Gwen glanced at the chalkboard outside a corner cafe. "Do you ever think about doing something else?" she asked as they passed it. "Like what? Something that's yours, not just working for someone else's company." He tilted his head. "I haven't had the luxury of thinking that way in a long time." "Well, maybe now you do." He glanced sideways at her. "You have an idea, don't you?" "I might," she said. "But you have to promise not to panic." Those are usually the words people say before suggesting something insane. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "You helped me when I had nothing on me. No coat, no money, no plan. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. You just saw someone who needed help." "I still don't see what that has to do with I bought a building," she said. "On West 7th, it's small, but it has a storefront and a workable kitchen. It used to be a bakery. The owner's retired. I want to turn it into something new." "Something you can run," he blinked. "You what? I know you love structure and people. And you're used to working with your hands. I've seen how you lead the warehouse. I've seen how the team listens to you. But this would be yours, Graham, not mine, yours." He stepped back. "You want me to run a cafe? I want you to build something you can pass down to Gracie one day, something with your name on the lease." He was quiet for a long moment. Cars passed, a dog barked across the street, and someone shouted a greeting from a stoop. Gwen waited without saying anything else. Finally, he said, "Why are you doing this?" She looked at him, her voice low and steady. "Because I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who only ever wanted something from me, and you were the first one who gave without asking. You changed the way I see the world." He ran a hand through his hair. "I wouldn't know where to start. I have someone who can help with the permits, and a friend who does interior design for small spaces. You pick the menu, hire your team, train them. I'll front the funds, but the business will be in your name, a clean contract, no strings." "No strings," she hesitated. "Just one, you let me be part of it, not as a partner, just as someone who gets to be there." His throat tightened. "You still think I can do this?" "I don't think." "I know." By the following week, they were walking through the dusty old storefront on West 7th. The windows were dirty and the floorboards creaked, but Graham could already see it. A long wooden counter, chalkboard menus. A space near the window where Gracie could sit and do homework after school. He brought her by that weekend, and she ran through the empty space with wide eyes. "Can we have cookies here?" she asked. "Absolutely." "And cocoa, only the good kind," she beamed. "Then I want to help." They spent the next month bringing the place to life. Gwen came by most afternoons after her meetings. Sometimes she brought a new light fixture or a mock-up for the logo. Sometimes she just sat on the window ledge while Graham painted. They talked about everything: her years in boarding school, his favorite childhood books, the way Gracie had taught herself to ride a bike last summer. One night, after Gracie had gone home with her aunt so he could finish late, Gwen stayed behind to help him install the shelving. They worked in companionable silence until Graham stepped back to survey the room. "This place is starting to feel real," he said. "You made it real," she replied. He turned to her, something unspoken rising in the space between them. "You've given me more than I know how to accept." She stepped closer. "You've given me something I didn't think I'd find." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Graham reached for her hand. "You're not just someone I owe," he said. "You're someone I want in my life. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are." She searched his face, the flicker of something raw and tender behind her eyes. "Then let me be there." He pulled her in, and their kiss was quiet, sure, and filled with all the unspoken things neither of them had dared to say until now. 2 months later, the cafe opened. Lines formed around the block. The community showed up in full force, excited to support a place that felt like theirs from the start. Graham named it Gracie's Corner, and the sign above the door was hand-painted in her favorite shade of blue. Gwen was there every morning before work, sipping coffee and reading the paper by the window. Gracie had a custom stool behind the counter where she handed out napkins and told customers which cookies were extra good. Graham moved with quiet confidence, greeting regulars, managing inventory, and training his team with the same calm presence Gwen had seen the day she met him. One evening after closing, Graham locked up and found Gwen waiting outside, a small wrapped box in her hand. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a key on a silver chain. "It's to the building," she said. "Fully signed over. You're the owner now." He stared at her, overwhelmed. "I meant what I said," she continued. "No strings, just pride, and maybe a few visits for coffee." He reached out and pulled her in, holding her close. "You're not just a visitor, Gwen, you're part of this." She looked up at him, her voice soft. "So are we real now?" "More than real," he said. "We're home." And for the first time in either of their lives, they knew what that truly meant. The first warm breeze of summer drifted through the open windows of Gracie's Corner, carrying with it the scent of fresh baked cinnamon rolls and the laughter of customers spilling out onto the sidewalk tables. Inside, Graham adjusted a stack of menus near the register while Gwen stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, carefully placing dainty porcelain saucers on a tray. "You're aware you've single-handedly turned this cafe into the most fashionable spot in the city, right?" Graham asked without looking up. Gwen glanced at him over the rim of her glasses. "They come for the coffee. They stay for the linen napkins. And the rosewater pistachio tarts. Those are just a perk." He crossed the room and gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from something softer that had settled between them in the months since the cafe launched, something that was no longer new but still powerful in its steadiness. "You've made this place feel like magic," he said. She turned to face him fully. "No." "We did." A bell chimed at the back door and Gracie burst in, cheeks flushed from the sun, her backpack bouncing. "Aunt Tessa said I could help with the napkin folding today," she announced, holding up a crumpled square of fabric with great pride. Graham knelt beside her. "That's the most important job in the whole place." "You ready?" She nodded fiercely, then tugged Gwen's hand. "You promised I could pick the flower for table 7 today, remember?" "I did," Gwen said, letting the little girl drag her toward the small vase display by the window. Graham watched them, his daughter and the woman who had completely changed the course of their lives, and something stirred deep in his chest. Not just gratitude, not just love, something larger, solid, permanent. Later that week, after the cafe had closed and Gracie had gone home with Tessa for a sleepover, Graham and Gwen sat on the rooftop of her building, legs stretched out toward the city skyline. He poured 2 glasses of wine from a chilled bottle, and they clinked quietly. "I have something to ask you," he said. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Now I'm nervous." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, smooth and unpolished. When he opened it, there was no glint of diamonds, no velvet lining, just a delicate band of platinum with a single, understated sapphire. "I didn't want anything flashy," he said. "Not because you can't have it, but because I want this to feel like us." Her breath caught. "I know this doesn't look like the world you're used to, but I want to build a life with you that's not about where we came from. It's about where we're going. Me, you, Gracie, together." She didn't speak, not at first. Instead, she reached out and touched the ring, then her hand closed over his. "Yes," she whispered. He exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You didn't even let me finish the question. You didn't need to." The wedding took place 4 weeks later, on a Sunday morning in the courtyard behind the cafe. White folding chairs lined the stone path, and flowers spilled from every windowsill. Gracie wore a pale yellow dress and carried a basket of wildflowers she'd picked herself from the park. She walked ahead of Gwen, who wore a simple ivory gown with no train, no veil, just a small sprig of lavender tucked into her hair. Graham stood beneath the archway, his hands steady as she approached. "I thought I'd cry," she whispered as she reached him. "You still can," he said. "I might." Their vows were short, quiet, and spoken with absolute certainty, There were no sweeping declarations, no grand metaphors, just promises. Honest, unadorned, and true. Afterward, the courtyard filled with laughter and clinking glasses, the smell of lemon tarts and fresh coffee lingering in the summer air. Gwen danced barefoot with Gracie beneath the string lights while Graham watched from the steps, his heart so full he didn't know how to hold it all. That night, after the last chair had been folded and the final guest had gone, Graham carried Gwen upstairs to the apartment above the cafe, the one they'd been slowly turning into their shared home. He paused in the doorway, the ring on her finger catching the moonlight. "We did it," he said. She leaned against his chest. "I didn't know this kind of happiness existed." "You created it," he said. "You walked into a stranger's life and rewrote it." She smiled, eyes shining. "We rewrote each other's." They fell asleep with the windows open, the sound of the city humming below, and the quiet promise of a life entirely their own wrapped around them like a blanket. 3 years later, the cafe had expanded into the unit next door, where Graham now hosted weekend baking classes for local families. Gwen had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Whitlow, but remained on the board, choosing to spend her mornings at Gracie's corner, working from the back office with a cup of black coffee and a croissant. Gracie, now 9, had started designing her own line of aprons with glitter pens and scrap fabric. She sold them for $5 apiece, offering free hugs and cookies with every purchase. Their life was not quiet. It was filled with early mornings and forgotten lunchboxes and last-minute menu changes, but it was real. And it was theirs. And every night, after the dishes were done and Gracie had fallen asleep with her nose buried in a book, Graham would wrap his arms around Gwen and press his forehead to hers. "Still glad you took that sweater?" he'd ask. Every single day, she'd answer, and she meant it. Because in a world built on appearances and expectations, she had found something rare, not a fairy tale, something better forever.